Earth Online begins now. Please select your starting hero. The game Earth Online has descended upon Blue Star. Players from every country will choose a starting organism to observe. As long as their chosen species survives to the next generation, their respective countries will receive massive national destiny rewards. To stand out in this game, crawling with tens of thousands of species, players from all over the world chose to rely on raw stats and game mechanics. But I ignored all common sense and decisively chose a brainless ape who did nothing but jump around holding a rock. You see, as a transmigrator, I realized that everyone in this world believed in creationism. Nobody believed humans evolved from ancient apes. So, I decided to use the complete theory of evolution to show them who the true darling of Mother Nature really is. Just entering the game, I looked at the preview of the current version. In the previous patch, the land was dominated by colossal beasts. They suppressed every other living thing with absolute, raw power. But then, a massive meteor plunged from the sky, and the once mighty dinosaur empire was wiped out just like that. Tens of thousands of years after the meteor struck, the entire world was a desolate, apocalyptic wasteland. Just then, a giant screen of light suddenly materialized in midair. Earth Online. The selection of national observers will begin in 3 minutes. A brand new version is about to launch. Fast-forwarding timeline to 4.4 million years prehistoric. We wish all national observers a thrilling game and a bountiful harvest in this new version. Soon, the roster of observers from every country lit up across the sky. But when it came to the observer for the Dragon Kingdom, the name selected was... The scene cuts to in the Earth Online Special Research Base in the imperial capital of the Dragon Kingdom. Everyone in the laboratory froze in shock, staring dead at the name on the screen. The head of the research team and a titan of the medical world, Elder Chin, felt his vision go black and almost passed out. A second later, your personal file was slammed onto Elder Chin's desk. An absolute academic failure. Hopelessly brain-dead in love, who completely fell apart and became a useless bum after his ex-girlfriend dumped him. Elder Chin's legs went weak as he slumped into his chair. This is a literal nightmare start. At that exact moment, you were sucked directly into a mysterious, special dimension. Everything around you was pitch black, with absolutely nothing in sight. Then, the screen in the sky refreshed once again. Respected Civilization Observer, the massive new version of Earth Online is now live. New maps and new gameplay mechanics are waiting to be unlocked. Please select the species you believe is most likely to become the ruler of the world, and begin your observation. Observers may intervene at critical junctures to alter the species' historical timeline, or even direct their evolutionary path. However, there is an absolute ironclad rule. The level of intervention must be kept within a strictly limited range, and the limit is no more than 3 times. The moment you land, you are dropped into a void filled with foam. The next second, you pull out 10 sets of Ardipithecus status cards. A clear 6-dimensional stat radar chart slams right in front of your eyes. Without a doubt, the stats for these 10 groups Ardipithecus are absolutely rock bottom. But only you know just how terrifyingly overpowered these creatures will become once they free up their hands. Without even blinking, they directly teleport and lock in the 10 groups of Ardipithecus. Just as you land, you run into several people fighting over the right to select the saber-toothed tigers. You roll your eyes at them like they are total idiots and quickly walk away. After walking a few steps, you arrive beneath a towering tree. Suddenly looking up, you spot a small ape hiding in the lush foliage, peering around warily. The cold mechanical system voice instantly echoes across the entire area. Dragon Country observer is locked onto the target. Ardipithecus. At the same time, a special research team is completely dumbfounded and loses their minds after figuring out your crazy move. Staring intently at the livestream, they gasp, "Is he insane? This is absolute madness." The official observer of our grand Dragon Country did not even spare a glance at the screen full of max-level divine beasts, and just had to pick a total weakling to observe. What on earth is this kid trying to do? Has he had enough of living, so he wants to drag all of humanity down to the grave with him? Following this terrifying thought, Elder Chin's mind immediately flashes to the dark history of you being brutally dumped by your ex-girlfriend. He immediately concludes right then and there, this kid has definitely been driven insane by the trauma. He has developed a classic antisocial retaliatory personality. Half an hour later, you are beamed back to the virtual space. Meanwhile, the players from all the other countries have also finished their selections. A real-time monitoring wall of Earth Online instantly pops up in front of your eyes. The screens show nothing but the daily lives, eating, drinking, and sleeping of all the selected species. As a qualified observer, your daily job is simply to watch, only using your 3 intervention opportunities when absolutely necessary. Soon the camera locks on to that Ardipithecus ape. Right now it is hiding fearfully in the middle of a tree trunk, scanning its surroundings with a highly alert gaze. This ape has lived in this forest for a very long time. This ape, all the nearby fruit has long been devoured clean. Its stomach is completely stuffed to its back from hunger, almost driving the little ape out of its mind. That sheer spark of will to survive begins to drive the little ape to do something no primate has ever done before. It grips a broken tree branch tightly with both hands and lets its body drop down, hanging fully suspended in midair. This unusual movement immediately drew a crowd of onlookers from the apes in the neighboring trees. A split second later, the little monkey lost his grip. And splat! He slammed face first onto the muddy ground, but almost instantly, terror rushed over him once again like a tidal wave. That deep-rooted instinct for survival forced him to move. Staying close to the dirt, he scrambled on all fours, desperately running for his life. But as he ran, he realized his front limbs were totally in the way, so he just gave up on using his hands as legs. He began to uncurl his arched back, forcing his spine straight, inch by inch. His scrawny back legs strained with every ounce of strength he had, driving him forward with ferocious speed. His posture grew straighter and straighter. He had literally forced himself to transition from crawling and bounding to standing upright on 2 legs. Before long, driven by that same desperate survival instinct, the entire pack of monkeys stood up and sprinted on 2 legs. At this moment, the ape species had completely freed their hands. The primitive ground apes had finally reached their epic, mind-blowing evolution. But what you didn't expect was that the massive commotion also drew in a top-tier predator, a saber-tooth. The saber-toothed tiger slinked low to the ground and suddenly lunged, pinning down one of the fleeing apes. The two tangled in a desperate struggle, but the ape's frail little body was instantly pinned to the dirt, opening its massive, bloodthirsty jaws. The tiger plunged its scimitar-like fangs deep into the ape's neck. Within a dozen seconds, the ape went completely limp. The tiger clamped its jaws around the carcass and slowly dragged it away. The surrounding apes were absolutely terrified and scrambled even faster toward the safety of the distant forest. Over in the exclusive livestream of Kappa Nation, countless comments flooded the screen, mockingly thanking the citizens of the Dragon Kingdom for providing a free meal. Did you see how powerful our saber-tooth is? A bunch of monkeys that only know how to hide in trees don't stand a chance. Of course, you had no idea about the mockery from the outside world. Facing the scene of that ground ape being brutally hunted, you remained completely calm. As a civilization observer, you only cared about the survival and reproduction of the entire species. Out of 20 or 30 apes, only 1 had been lost as the price for reaching the new forest. Here, the trees were bursting with wild fruit, more than enough to give them a massive feast. High up in one of the trees, that same little ape sat safely among the branches. He suddenly raised his head, his hollow gaze drifting up toward the sky. His dark pupils reflected the brilliant, sparkling sea of stars. It was as if he was completely frozen, just staring blankly like that. Meanwhile, inside the Earth's Arrogance Research Initiative, a group of researchers were watching the sky screen. One of the researchers said impatiently, "The sky screen gave us a close-up. Ling Mo must be actively observing this ape. But what's the point? Yet, you still watch this scene with keen interest." You recall a quote you read in your past life. When the very first ape looked up at the stars, humanity's exploration of the universe was already 80% complete. This is a monumental moment. And that's why you are actively observing, actively keeping a record. The notebook, clutched tightly in your hand, is filled with the sheer overwhelming awe you feel at this very moment. The sky screen speeds up once again. This entire Earth Online game played out just like a documentary. This time, the sky screen freezes on a pregnant mother hominid. Her belly is heavily swollen. The mother ape is in excruciating pain during labor, able to do nothing but scream and wail in pure agony. Fortunately, there are no large predators hunting nearby. Inside the Earth's Arrogance Research Initiative, Elder Chin gently adjusts the reading glasses on the bridge of his nose. In our worldview, true bipedalism, actually walking upright, is something only humans can achieve, while animals like gorillas and monkeys can stand up. Most of the time, they still rely on their arms to keep their balance. But in the transition from this hominid's very first steps to becoming fully proficient, in other words, these hominids have mastered a trait that we thought belonged exclusively to humans. Elder Chin's conclusion causes every researcher in the room to gasp in shock. Back in the forest, the mother ape has successfully given birth. But the newborn baby ape can't even open its eyes because it is not yet fully developed. Its limbs are short, weak, and frail. Its fur is thin and sparse, as it lies on a giant lotus leaf that the mother ape had gathered before giving birth. Wriggling gently like a tiny caterpillar, it lets out soft, high-pitched whimpers. This is the newborn's only way of communicating. The mother ape slowly pushes herself up and cradles the baby in her arms. She looks around instinctively, finally locking her eyes onto a large, sturdy male hominid. The male hominid seems to realize something. Deep inside the thick, overgrown grass, he dug up 2 wild fruits he'd hidden there just a little while ago. Clutching the fruit tightly, he carefully made his way back to the mother ape. She stared intently as he approached, and he gently handed the 2 fruits over to her. He let out a few soft, low grunts, as if trying to speak to her, or trying to get some kind of message across, and she actually understood him. She immediately started tearing at the peel, stuffing the fruit into her mouth as fast as she could, shoving it all in. But what happened next was completely unexpected. The male ape didn't get angry or try to stop her from eating his food. He just stood there, watching her quietly. Every now and then, he'd tilt his head as if he were studying her, but there was a deep, undeniable warmth shining in his eyes. By this point, the brains of these early hominids had already begun to grow. They had expanded from the size of an orange to the size of a grapefruit. This sudden leap in brain capacity unlocked a whole new level of intelligence, making him realize that this tiny creature in front of him was deeply connected to him. This was his own flesh and blood. As time went on, He began to actively protect and care for both the mother and the baby. Whenever they were hungry, he'd go out to hunt for food. Around this time, these early hominids started showing signs of working together. The concept of family was finally beginning to take root. They started heading out in small groups of 2 or 3 to search for food. This was a massive evolutionary leap. Even the rival research team from Gabon Nation began to realize something was off. Their team was busy monitoring the ultimate predator of this era, the deadly saber-toothed tiger. And the saber-toothed tiger's absolute favorite prey happened to be these early hominids. This easy prey had those arrogant researchers over there constantly celebrating. But as the days went by, they slowly noticed that hunting these hominids was suddenly becoming much harder. Before, the tigers could easily snag one every 2 or 3 days. But now, the hominids could spot danger from a mile away and make a run for it before the predators even got close. Inside the arrogant Gobang research lab, the head researcher was on a tense video call with Kim Tai-hoon. If we want to completely wipe out these ancestral hominids, the saber-toothed tiger's raw power is more than enough. The real issue right now is that those damn monkeys have gotten way too good at hiding. So why don't we manually interfere with the saber-toothed tiger's habitat? We can relocate them directly into the hominid's main territory. We've done the research. Saber-toothed tigers are highly adaptable, living right on the line between solitary and social. Behaviors like that. All we have to do is change the environment and force a massive number of saber-toothed tigers to gather in one spot. That way, we can force them to adapt and become pack hunters. Once he had a clear strategy, Kim Tai-hoon immediately initiated his active intervention. Under the behavioral habits section of the observed species, Kim Tai-hoon targeted the current habitat of the Juan apes. In an instant, every single Machiratus across the entire continent began moving in unison, drawn toward a single destination. On the giant screen of Gobang, a map of the continent appeared. Countless dense red dots were marching toward a single coordinate. A rough estimate put their numbers at tens of thousands. Jiabang's active intervention was incredibly effective. Before long, the number of Machiratus in the territory of the primordial Diwan began to skyrocket. Under this relentless siege, the Duanjan apes seemed thrown back to their days at the absolute bottom of the food chain. Just stepping out to forage meant running into a saber-toothed tiger, and their chances of making it back alive were miserably slim. Without a stable food source, the newly thriving primordial Diamond once again faced a crisis of total extinction. In the Dragon Kingdom's Earth Mysteries Research Group, everyone was fraught with anxiety. Surely Linmo had noticed that the number of Machiratos was rising rapidly, right? This was a blatant target on his back. If that was the case, why hadn't he used his right of active intervention yet? Meanwhile, inside the virtual space, you already had a plan in motion. With only 3 active interventions available, every single one had to be used at the absolute perfect moment. For this first time, you planned to help the Duan apes unlock the throwing skill. You immediately pulled up the data on the 10 groups of Duan apes and clicked the intervention button. In the bottom left corner, an external assistance button was glowing green, but you had no intention of using it. While the experts outside might have compiled endless data analyses on the Dianjuan, you believe that no one in the world understood these 10 groups of Diwan apes better than you. In prehistoric times, if you wanted to know who the real apex predator was, it was undoubtedly the ancestors of humanity, jokingly dubbed the terrifying upright apes. And their ultimate trump card for reigning at the top of the world lay in a few cheat-like skills, with bipedal walking and throwing being the absolute most critical elements. To unlock the throwing skill, the key was to modify the Duan's physical attributes. You pulled up a detailed diagram of the Daiwan's physical data. Primate shoulders are almost completely locked in place, making them short and weak. Now, you are going to lengthen their collarbones and broaden their shoulders. This way, the shoulders of the Artipithecus will be infinitely close to a human's right-angled shoulders. Next, lower the shoulders, adjust the opening and closing angle of the shoulder joints, making the angle wider. Then, strengthen the muscles surrounding the shoulder joints and expand the tendons and ligaments. By doing this, the collarbone widens, the shoulders drop, the joint range expands, and the tendons and ligaments become incredibly powerful. Combined with their unique S-shaped spine, this massive biological slingshot is completely formed. After this set of modifications, and armed with hard stones, it is safe to say that almost no carbon-based life form can withstand it. He looks at his masterpiece with satisfaction. For the entire Artipithecus species, this single modification will be enough to change the fate of their entire race as Limo's active intervention comes to an end. The Artipithecus body data he modified is rapidly synchronized across the entire population. The body of every single Artipithecus begins to undergo obvious changes. It is as if hundreds of thousands of years of evolution are compressed into a mere few minutes. Their shoulders begin to widen, their collarbones elongate, and the muscles at the back of their shoulders swell. Their entire build appears noticeably more robust. Although this change is striking, it doesn't have much of an immediate impact on the daily lives of the Artipithecus, because at this moment, they have no idea what has actually happened to their bodies, nor do they realize that a god-tier biological cheat code has already been installed within them. The Artipithecus continue to live their lives just as before. However, a recent surge in the saber-toothed tiger population in this region has made going out to forage extremely difficult for them, even putting their very survival at risk. Fortunately, The habitat the Ardipithecus currently occupy is quite complex, with grasslands, jungles, lofty mountains, and babbling brooks. They are situated right at the junction of several different terrains. Originally, the Ardipithecus relied on the jungle to survive, but the threat of the saber-toothed tigers is just too great, and they have no choice but to retreat deep into the mountains. The complex mountain terrain can effectively hinder the movements of the saber-toothed tigers, and the mountains also harbor natural caves left behind by ancient geological activity. Staying here is clearly much safer than remaining in the jungle. At this moment, a mother ape sits at the mouth of a cave, cradling her infant, who is only a few months old. Staring blankly into the distance, she was waiting for her mate, who had got out in search of food. Ever since the concept of family first emerged, these ground apes had slowly grown accustomed to this way of life. The mother apes needed to nurse and feed their offspring, so the task of foraging naturally fell onto the shoulders of the males. Right now, the sky was gradually growing dark. Nearly 5 to 6 hours had passed since the male ground apes had left. Under normal circumstances, they should have returned long ago. But today, there wasn't even a trace of them. And as the darkness crept in closer, the world outside would only become more dangerous. After all, the ground ape's vision was no match for the apex predators of the wild, who could hunt in pitch-black darkness without a single hitch. But these ground apes? They couldn't. By night fell, their visibility plummeted. Right now, their only survival mechanism relied on numbers and cooperation to stay alert. Without being able to see their surroundings, stepping out was practically a death sentence. The mother ape's intelligence was obviously not developed enough to process complex worry, nor did she know if something terrible had happened to the foraging group. All she felt right now was the gnawing pang of hunger. She needed food. The infant in her arms needed food even more, and the other ground apes inside this cave needed food just as desperately. At dusk, a warm orange glow spilled across the landscape, filtering through the dense foliage to scatter golden flecks of light upon the dirt. Under the mother ape's watchful gaze, a few shadows finally emerged at the very edge of the horizon. Their silhouettes were stretched long by the setting sun, swaying as they walked. It was the foraging ground apes. There were 6 of them in total. Each ape clutched a pile of fist-sized fruits in their arms. The mother ape instantly sprang up from her sitting position, her eyes shining with pure excitement. She pointed toward the distance and let out a loud screech. Her calls quickly drew out the other apes inside the cave, who rushed to the entrance one after another, hooting in celebration. The foragers were back, and that meant they would have food for the night. Instinctively, they cheered and celebrated with sheer joy. The 6 ground apes quickly made it back to the cave, piling the fruits they carried into a corner. This was a massive harvest. Plump, ripe fruits filled the entire corner. While most of the ground apes cheered and jumped with joy, a few of the more perceptive ones seemed to sense that something was off. Pacing around the 6 returned hominids, and then running back to the cave entrance to peer outside, doing this over and over, as if asking if there were any other hominids left. After all, more than a dozen hominids had gone out to forage for food at noon today, but only half of them had made it back. The 6 returned hominids looked at one another, their browns tightly furrowed, their faces filled with sheer terror. Fear is a primal instinct, and this panic quickly spread to the other hominids in the cave. It was clear that the foraging group had run into a deadly crisis, and that danger, of course, came from the saber-toothed tigers. Today, they had run straight into a pack of 6 saber-toothed tigers that had launched a brutal ambush on them. The predators were too fast, too ferocious. The hominids stood absolutely no chance. In the end, several of them were torn apart on the spot. Only after the pack had fed itself to the full did the surviving hominids get a chance to flee. It was a brutal, merciless slaughter. The lucky survivors who made it back were paralyzed with fear by the massive gathering of those saber-tooths. The threat of the tigers was like a sword, constantly hanging over the hominids' heads. At this very moment, they even felt a desperate urge to run away. But then, having low intelligence had its advantages. At least for now, the tribe didn't feel grief over the death of their companions, or perhaps the seeds of such emotion were just starting to bud, but it wouldn't linger for long. In the wild, life and death are just everyday occurrences. Their companions were dead, but the surviving hominids still had to go on living, fighting with everything they had just to survive. They wouldn't overthink the meaning of life. They only cared about how to satisfy their growling stomachs. The starving hominids huddled together and began dividing up the heavy pile of fruit stashed in the corner. It was a nut-like fruit, quite large, but encased in a hard shell. One had to crack it open to get to the delicious treat inside. This wasn't the hominids' first time eating them. Highly experienced, they clutched the fruits and began gnawing at them with their teeth. At this stage of evolution, the hominids possessed sharp canine teeth. Tearing through the hard shells was still doable, though it took an immense amount of effort. Soon, the sound of relentless gnawing echoed from inside the cave. One mother ape, cradling her baby, struggled to find leverage using only one hand. She bit and gnawed for ages, but she just couldn't crack it open. She couldn't help but grow incredibly anxious. Hunger was gnawing at her, urging her on. Yet this delicious treat was right in front of her, entirely out of reach. She was growing frantic. Suddenly, her eyes darted around, and she spotted a stone lying on the ground. An idea seemed to strike her. She carefully set the fruit down, then reached out and tentatively picked up the stone. She raised her arm high and brought it down with a fierce swing. The hard shell of the fruit shattered instantly. Her struggle was finally over, and she let out an excited, triumphant shriek. Eagerly, she stuffed the delicious fruit into her mouth and began to chew. Her actions weren't overly conspicuous, but they still caught the attention of a few companions. An ape sitting across from her looked down at his own fruit, which he had chewed on for ages, only to leave a tiny crack, then looked at the shattered fruit on the ground in front of the mother ape. His eyes lit up instantly. He called out to her, pointing his finger at the stone she had just used near her feet. The mother ape looked down and let out a grunt. Ape across from her nodded vigorously, then placed his own fruit on the ground. Understanding his plea, the mother ape picked up the stone, preparing to toss it to him just as they always did. But this time was different. Her shoulder joint opened up with unprecedented range. Even she didn't realize it. She hurled the stone toward her companion with all her might. The stone flew fast and smacked the other ape squarely on the forehead. She had used 80% of her strength. Normally, they had to throw things with immense force just to get them to travel any distance. But now, everything had changed. Her newly evolved body structure meant the stone flew like a bullet. Its destructive power had multiplied. That single hit knocked the sitting ape completely flat on his back. The massive commotion instantly drew the attention of the rest of the troop. The mother ape was also left completely stunned. She shook her head, completely clueless as to what had just happened. The struck ape was now clutching his head, rolling back and forth on the ground in sheer agony. It hurt. It hurt terribly. He could clearly feel a massive lump swelling up on his forehead. Even the slightest touch sent a bone-chilling pain through his body. The agonizing pain forced a wild, painful shriek from his throat. The other apes crowded around, their faces filled with utter confusion, wondering what on earth this guy was throwing a fit about. It took a long while, but before the injured ape finally began to recover. Whimpering and groaning, he slowly sat back up, rubbing the massive bump on his head. His eyes locked onto that very stone. He picked it up, turning it over and over to inspect it. He couldn't seem to comprehend how such a tiny thing could cause him so much pain. But after staring at it for a long time, he was still clueless. Suddenly, making up his mind, he gripped the stone tight, spun around, and hurled it straight at a much burlier hominid. Another sharp crack echoed, followed instantly by a piercing shriek of pain. The burly hominid collapsed to the ground, clutching his head and wailing. It was as if this hominid had just discovered a whole new world. His eyes darted to the other stones scattered across the ground. He wanted to test a theory. Was it just that one specific stone that possessed such devastating power? Or could any stone do the same? So he scooped up stone after stone, cradling a whole pile of them in his arms. His bright, clever eyes scanned the surroundings, locking onto the other hominids inside the cave. Whoosh! Plack! Down went one hominid. Kush! Flack! Another one bit the dust. He realized he was onto something absolutely mind-blowing. The little ape grew even more thrilled. Clutching his pile of stones, he began lobbing them at his companions one by one. Watching them drop like flies, he jumped up and down in pure ecstasy. But a split second later, he was tackled to the ground. A hard, stinging slap landed square on his face. It was an older, wiser hominid. He simply couldn't stand the nonsense anymore, so he decided to teach the troublemaker a lesson. Right after, the other hominids who had been pelted scrambled back to their feet, fuming with rage. They glared at the pinned culprit. In an instant, they swarmed him like a pack of angry hornets, punching, slapping, kicking, and roaring in fury. Clearly, every single victim was absolutely livid. Yet, the troublemaker was struggling desperately. The moment he managed to wriggle free, he began gesticulating wildly. First, he waved his hands frantically at the others to calm them down. Then he pointed at the stones on the ground, mimicking a throwing motion. Through his vivid, animated demonstration, the other hominins slowly began to catch on. One by one, their eyes shifted toward those ordinary, unremarkable stones. A particularly curious hominid picked one up and gave it a tentative toss. In an instant, the stone flew far, far away. The hominids stared at one another, completely stunned by what had just happened. Soon, more and more hominids began experimenting with it. In their hands, ordinary rocks seemed to transform into lethal, high-impact weapons. Smashed against tree trunks, they could easily tear right through the thick, sturdy bark. The largest, most muscular hominid was even more impressive. Throwing with all his might, he launched a rock dozens of meters away. Watching this, the other hominids let out wild screeches of amazement. In that very moment, they truly realized they had unlocked a formidable new power. So, the hominids began gathering rocks from all over the area. Small ones, medium ones, large ones. They picked up everything they could find. The biggest rocks were even the size of a basketball. But they quickly noticed that the tiny ones didn't pack much of a punch, while the massive ones couldn't be thrown very far at all. Only the medium, palm-sized stones packed the most devastating blow when thrown. This discovery threw all the apes into a frenzy of excitement. They couldn't wait to try it themselves, eager to master this sudden, game-changing skill. They kept practicing long after the night had turned pitch black, with absolutely no intention of stopping. They were just too thrilled. But as the night deepened, the entire forest fell dead silent. Because of this, the noisy hominids stood out like a sore thumb in the quiet woods. Meanwhile, inside the exclusive livestream room of Gobang,
Kim Tae-yoon's stream was focused on 3 Makairata saber-tooths, still prowling for food in the dark.
Recently, more and more saber-tooths had gathered in this region, and many of them were starting to face a severe food shortage.
Hunting was always a game of luck to begin with.
And with so much competition now, some saber-tooths were bound to go hungry. What do you do when you are starving? You keep hunting, of course. Fortunately, the darkness didn't bother the Makairata saber-tooths much. So even after night had completely fallen, there were still saber-tooths on the prowl. Right now, 3 Makairata saber-tooths had slunk into the mountain forest. The competition out in the open was just too fierce, leaving them no choice but to enter the woods to see if they could find any prey. As soon as they entered, they were instantly drawn to the noisy commotion. In the live stream, the once quiet chat suddenly exploded with comments. Am I hearing things? Are there actually animals howling in the middle of the night? Nope, you're not hearing things. There definitely are. And honestly, it sounds exactly like those stupid monkeys watched by the Dragon Nation. Oh my gosh, I just popped over to the Dragon Nation's livestream. You guys were absolutely spot on. Those dumb monkeys are literally hugging a pile of rocks right now, screaming like complete idiots. Haha, dumb monkeys will always be dumb monkeys. They are already weak as hell. It's the middle of the night, and instead of staying hidden, they dare to make such loud, freakish noises. They're practically begging to die. Do they not see that our saber-toothed tigers have already noticed them? On the giant sky screen, Lanting, 3 Makairata saber-toothed tigers prowling nearby indeed noticed the bizarre shrieks echoing from the pitch-black cave not far away. The sound was so incredibly obvious, but even the saber-toothed tigers instantly perked up. In almost an instant, the predator's killer instincts were fully activated. Like highly trained soldiers, the 3 saber-toothed tigers instantly lowered their massive bodies, stealthily creeping toward the direction of the cave. For apex predators, the darkness of night is the ultimate camouflage. Moving in perfect unison, the 3 saber-toothed tigers stayed low to the ground, slithering inch by inch toward the cave where the noise was coming from. The entire approach was absolutely silent. Inside the exclusive live stream room of Gobang, the scrolling chat was filled with unspeakable excitement. I just came back from the Dragon Country stream. There are at least dozens of apes nesting in that cave. Our saber-toothed tigers can finally enjoy a feast. It's just a shame only 3 saber-toothed tigers made it into the mountains. If only there were more of them. Maybe they could completely wipe out this group of apes. The Gobang viewers in the live stream were beyond thrilled. To them, the question of whether 3 saber-toothed tigers could defeat dozens of apes was not even worth worrying about. It wasn't just the viewers from Gobang. Even the viewers in the Dragon Country livestream felt the exact same dread. There was no helping it. The sheer terror of the saber-toothed tigers was simply too overwhelming. Viewers had witnessed ground apes being slaughtered by saber-toothed tigers on more than one occasion. Even when ground apes traveled in large groups, the moment they crossed paths with even a single hunting saber-toothed tiger, their only option was to run. In terms of strength, speed, explosiveness, and sheer lethality, the gap between them was just far too massive. Faced with such an apex predator at the absolute top of the food chain,
No matter how many ground apes there were, fighting back was utterly futile.
it could only watch helplessly as their companions were slaughtered, not daring to show even the slightest hint of resistance. Ground apes were naturally weak and cowardly. This helpless image had long been deeply etched into everyone's minds. Now, facing a surprise attack from 3 saber-toothed tigers, just how many of the ground apes in the cave could actually make it out alive? That was the only thing the Dragon Country viewers were truly worrying about. On the sky screen projection, 3 saber-toothed tigers have already crept up near the cave entrance. Inside the pitch-black cave, the noise seems to have died down significantly. It is as if the apes have finally realized they shouldn't make too much noise in the dead of night. But it is already far too late. The predators are already at the door. The lead saber-tooth twitches its nose slightly, sniffing the air to catch a scent. The scent carries a wealth of information, and it tells the saber-tooth that there is a large pack of apes inside. Saliva begins to drip from its menacing jaws. It has been starving for a long time, and it can barely contain its hunger. It closes in quickly. Its massive paws cross the threshold of the cave. Just as it is about to pounce, a rock suddenly flies out of nowhere and smashes into the cave wall right next to it. The sudden noise startles the coiled predator. Its head whips around toward the sound. A stone rolls right up to its paws. The beast recoils, taking a couple of steps back in shock, and lets out a ferocious roar at the ordinary stone. But right after that roar, every sound inside the cave instantly vanishes. Obviously, the apes inside have heard the saber-tooth's roar. They know this sound all too well. It is a roar they could never forget. A primal terror coded deep within their genes. The saber-toothed tiger is the ultimate natural enemy of these apes. Every single ape stares at the cave entrance in sheer terror. Now, 3 saber-toothed tigers stand at the cave entrance, completely blocking the only way out. Trapped in this nightmare. The weak apes are nothing more than lambs to the slaughter. Dozens of them huddle together at the very back of the cave, pressing their backs against the rock wall. At the entrance, one of the saber-tooths lets out a low growl and lowers its body once more. Its powerful front muscles tense up. With a violent push off the ground, it lunges forward like an arrow shot from a bow. But right at this critical moment, two apes inside the cave have a completely different idea. The first ape who discovered that rocks could be thrown is now gripping a fist-sized stone with all its might. Standing at the very front edge of the huddled pack, its grip on the stone tightens more and more. He tensed his muscles to the absolute limit as he saw three saber-toothed tigers charging wildly toward him. They were moving so fast that blurred into a terrifying streak of motion. In that moment, his heart pounded frantically, reaching an unprecedented peak of terror. Grip the stone with all his might. The ape could no longer hear a thing. Without knowing why, he threw his mouth wide open and let out a deafening, thunderous roar. In that very instant, strength surged back into his body. That hysterical roar seemed to shatter the primal fear buried deep within his genes. He raised the stone high above his head, stepped straight up, twisted his waist to the absolute limit, and drew his arm back as far as it would go. His entire body was like a tightly coiled bow, and the rock in his hand was the unstoppable arrow. With every ounce of his strength, he hurled the stone. In the blink of an eye, the leading saber-toothed tiger was less than 10 meters away from the apes. Galatians at the doubt. At such a close distance, the beast had absolutely no way to dodge. It couldn't even register what was flying toward it, because the rock was traveling at a blinding speed, smashing violently right into its forehead. The leading tiger's charging body came to a sudden, violent halt. Its head whipped sideways from the impact, and its massive body crashed heavily to the ground. The other two tigers, trailing just 2 paces behind, noticed the sudden commotion. They watched in disbelief as their leading partner suddenly collapsed. Instantly, these apex predators sensed danger and skidded to a halt, wearily eyeing their fallen companion. It seemed to be trying to crawl back up, but the heavy blow to its skull left its mind dazed and disoriented. With great effort, it rolled over onto its belly, shaking its head violently to clear its vision. But the more it shook, the dizzier it became. That fist-sized rock had actually cracked the tiger's skull. Though it hadn't pierced completely through, it left a deep, fractured crevice. The agonizing pain racking its body made the beast let out a whimpering cry. Fear completely took over, and the other two dared not make another move. Instead, they circled their wounded companion. Meanwhile, the ape who had just hurled the stone was panting heavily. His eyes were locked onto the injured predator. How chillingly similar this was to the time he had struck his own companion. Looking at his former apex predator lying defeated right before him, the shock wore off, and he realized he was the one who had done this.
So, even he could force those fierce, powerful predators to bow their heads. So the very beasts that once made him shake with terror could also end up whimpering on the ground.
An ape's brain couldn't process complex thoughts just yet, but a spark of realization had already begun to take root. His paralyzing fear of the saber-toothed tigers was slowly starting to melt away, because he had just proven, with hard facts, that fear could be beaten. Turning around, he let out a second, powerful roar at his trembling companions, cowering in the shadows. His pack looked up, watching him brandish the stone, the roar tearing from his throat sounding incredibly powerful, just as it had fueled his own courage moments ago. Now, the others could see it too. The mighty saber-toothed tiger, whimpering on the ground right in front of them. Behind it, the other two predators paced back and forth, consumed by hesitation. 3 apex predators, completely stopped in their tracks by a single stone. Who knew a simple stone could hold such terrifying power? Grip another stone tightly. The ape took his stance once more. With a sudden burst of strength, he hurled it forward. It flew with blinding speed. This time, the rock slammed directly into the hind leg of the wounded beast on the ground. The once fearsome predator bared its terrifying fangs, letting out another agonizing shriek. Stunned and confused, the other two tigers scrambled back several steps. They saw the flying object, but their primitive brains couldn't comprehend how such a thing was even possible. How could any creature on Earth inflict pain from more than 10 meters away? It defied all the rules of nature. But that second throw served as a perfect demonstration. It was a masterclass for the dozens of terrified apes still cowering in the corner. It turned out that throwing a stone could drive these monsters back. As the tigers retreated, the apes' collective terror began to vanish. Every single ape in the cave seemed to realize something in that moment. One by one, they turned their eyes toward the ground. In the darkness, more than half of the pack reached down, gripped a stone, and stood ready to fight. Row after row of glowing eyes locked onto the 3 saber-toothed tigers. The tigers felt the shift, stared down by dozens of pairs of eyes, their predatory confidence shattered. Their raw ferocity, which had dominated this world for eons, was suddenly useless. From this moment on, the tables had completely turned. Inside the pitch-black cave, visibility was close to zero. For the saber-toothed tigers with their perfect night vision, this wasn't an issue at all. The cave itself wasn't very large. In fact, it was incredibly cramped. From the entrance to the very back, the straight-line distance was barely 20 to 30 meters. At that distance, a saber-toothed tiger could close the gap in a single, explosive leap. The cave's width was less than 5 meters. 3 massive saber-toothed tigers were more than enough to completely block the entrance. By all accounts, this should have been an easy hunt. The apes cowering inside were nothing more than an all-you-can-eat buffet. All the tigers had to do was charge in and feast. It should have been a flawless victory. But what happened next defied all logic. Ever since that ordinary, unremarkable stone brought down the lead tiger, Everything changed. The wall of mocking comments flooding the Catstick Nation's exclusive livestream room instantly ground to a halt. The entire livestream room fell dead silent. Yet, the footage on the sky screen kept playing. At that exact moment, the Dragon Nation's exclusive livestream room erupted with thunderous applause. Even the people of the Dragon Nation themselves hadn't expected this, that a catastrophic, species-ending crisis would be resolved in such a mind-blowing, unexpected way. Inside the Dragon Nation's Earth Online Special Research Task Force, there was absolute silence. The researchers in the room stared at one another, their eyes filled with sheer disbelief. One researcher wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. Just moments ago, he thought they were finished. After all, this was a matter that decided the very fate of the Dragon Nation. Elder Qin had been silent this entire time. His brow was deeply furrowed, as if locked in deep thought. As the head of the Earth Online Special Research Task Force, he had been analyzing the in-game species across several patch versions already. It wasn't like he hadn't seen powerful, terrifying beasts before. The colossal predators of the dinosaur era were still vivid in his mind, but absolutely nothing could compare to the sheer shock of what he had just witnessed today. Forcing himself to calm down, he began to analyze the situation in detail. Only now did he finally understand exactly what Lin Mo, their civilization observer, had actually done during the intervention phase. Back then, Lin Mo had flatly refused any external assistance. He had even driven Elder Qin to fly into a rage and curse him out. For a while, everyone believed Lin Mo was just there to sabotage them, but the scene just now proved Lin Mo was right all along. We all underestimated this new civilization observer. Elder Qin sighed softly as everything clicked into place. He then pointed at the sky screen and said, "Earlier, Lin Mo took the initiative to intervene with the Daiwan Ape, and then the Daiwan Ape learned the skill of throwing rocks. Throwing rocks seems like such a trivial, ordinary action. But in reality, it was a modification that was practically a cheat code. We all thought that throwing a mere rock wouldn't do anything against a massive, terrifying beast. But that mindset only exists because we are looking at the problem from a human perspective. Just like how a human would never try to take on a lion or tiger armed with only a rock. Whether we could deal any damage is one thing, but we would almost certainly end up dead or severely injured. Because we are humans. That is naturally how we think. From start to finish, our goal is always to win a battle completely unscathed. So we don't throw rocks to attack wild beasts. Because we have countless safer, more advanced ways to attack. For example, firearms and other weapons. And because of that, we subconsciously assumed such a small action couldn't possibly be effective against giant predators. But what if we look at it from the perspective of a wild beast? Elder Qin's single sentence instantly woke up everyone in the room. A female researcher fell silent for a brief moment before crying out in shock. If we look at it from that angle, then it's actually terrifying. Ever since Earth Online started running, looking back at every single creature that has ever appeared, including the mighty dinosaurs that ruled 3 entire versions of Earth Online, if they wanted to win, they had to rely on brutal, close-quarters combat. Because of this, whether they were massive, whether they possessed crushing strength, whether their fangs were razor-sharp, or whether their claws were lethal, was the ultimate deciding factor between life and death. But in a world governed by these rules, if a group of opponents capable of long-range attacks emerged, then all of this physical advantages would vanish in an instant. Because I don't even need to get close and trade blows with you. No matter how sharp your claws are, if you can't even touch me, it's all completely pointless. Elder Qin nodded in agreement. That's why I said we all underestimated Lin Mo. Our thinking was just too outdated. We were all focused on how to gain a bigger advantage, using the existing conditions. But Yaxin took a completely different path, exploiting the interference rules to forge a brand new trail, and even managed to overtake everyone on the turn. He was right to reject outside assistance. Our flawed logic would have only ended up cluttering his mind. At this moment, Elder Qin seemed completely at ease, even though he had ruthlessly cursed Lin Mo out earlier. Maybe Lin Mo really does have a way to pull off a victory. Inside the projection on the sky screen, for the 3 saber-toothed cats currently invading the cave, the narrow cave should have originally been an advantageous terrain for them. But now, as dozens of apes picked up rocks at the same time, the entire situation was completely turned on its head. The saber-toothed cats could clearly sense a deadly threat looming inside the cave. Danger was everywhere, with no way of knowing where it was coming from, or how to dodge it. In all their past hunting experience, they'd never encountered a situation like this. So, the cats didn't dare to make a reckless move, but their superior natural vision let them see with their own eyes, the apes raising the rocks in their hands and raining them down upon them. In that instant, the trajectories of those flying stones were just too fast for the 3 saber-toothed cats to react to, and the distance between them was far too close. In a mere fraction of a second, they felt blows raining down on them from every direction. The rocks were fast and heavy. Each strike on their flesh immediately left a massive welt, bruising their skin instantly. A blow to the head or other vulnerable spots would knock them out cold, or worse, kill them. The saber-toothed tigers roared, thrashing their massive bodies. But the apes unleashed wave after wave of heavy stones. The tigers realized that no matter how much they thrashed, their bodies were constantly slammed by new waves of attacks. It felt exactly like being cornered and mauled by a relentless pack of wild hyenas.
If they guarded their heads, they left their backs completely exposed.
Even if they had incredible strength,
If they couldn't even lay a claw on their prey,
and all that power was completely useless.
right now, the 3 saber-toothed tigers all had the exact same thought. They needed to run,
But the tiger that had charged the fastest at the start had taken a brutal blow to the head
and was already on the verge of passing out. Right after, its leg joints were shattered by heavy stones.
leaving it completely unable to stand.
At least the other 2 could still move.
They managed to dodge and weave through the dense, incoming shower of stones. Even though they couldn't dodge them all,
Their survival instincts at least allowed them to shield their vulnerable heads,
using their backs and torsos to absorb the brutal impacts. Sensing that things had gone terribly wrong, the 2 tigers behind turned around and bolted out of the cave. But the saber-toothed tiger, pinned to the ground, had nowhere to run. So, an even more violent rain of stones poured down on it, relentlessly. Its body was battered, blood flowing from countless wounds. It did everything it could to tuck its head in.
but the heavy impact still left it dazed and seeing stars.
It wasn't until the apes could no longer find any suitable stones on the cave floor
That this bloody beatdown finally came to an end.
the saber-toothed tiger wasn't dead yet, but it was barely clinging to life. Its massive body lay collapsed in a pool of blood and stones, breathing its final, ragged breaths. Wake whimpers escaped from its throat, devoid of all its former power. The ground ape who had thrown the very first stone stepped forward slowly, urged on by his cheering companions behind him. He cautiously walked up to the fallen saber-toothed tiger, looking it over from left to right. Only when he was absolutely certain this massive beast could no longer fight back did he let out a triumphant roar. It was as if he was telling his tribe that they were finally safe. Hearing this, more and more apes gathered around.
One of the strongest apes even hauled over a basketball-sized rock.
When they had first gathered stones, everyone thought this one was too heavy to be of any use. But in this crucial moment, it proved to be incredibly useful. A muscular ape hoisted a massive boulder high above his head. With a terrifying whoosh, he brought it crashing down. The saber-toothed tiger was completely dead, drawing its final breath. All around, the other apes began to dance and jump with joy. This was their way of expressing a simple, primal emotion. Pure, raw excitement.
In the past, the apes had always been nothing but food for the saber-toothed tiger. No one ever thought this once unstoppable predator would now lie dead right in front of them.
Its massive body was covered in deep wounds, with fresh blood still oozing out.
But the raw, red meat peeking through the torn, bloodied fur instantly caught the apes' attention. Some of the apes even began to swallow hard, salivating at the sight.
They seemed to realize that maybe, just maybe, this beast was actually edible. In reality, at this stage in their evolution, large prey wasn't even on their menu. Almost everything they ate consisted of wild fruits picked from trees. But now, the apes' eyes began to gleam with a new kind of hunger. They needed protein,
And once a desire like that takes root, it is impossible to shake.
so they pushed forward the very same ape who had thrown the first stone. His companions trusted him more than anyone else, because when they were facing certain death, he was the first one to stand up. And for that, he won the absolute respect of the entire troop, just like an alpha wolf. In this moment, he became the king of the apes. Even though these primitive creatures had no actual concept of royalty,
His companions chose to put all their trust in him.
and he did not let them down. He sat right down next to the dead tiger, reached out, grabbed the torn flesh, and ripped it wide open. Then, he shoved the raw meat into his mouth and began to chew.
The meat was tough and hard to chew.
But it was infinitely more delicious than any wild fruit or insect he had ever tasted.
His eyes lit up instantly.
He immediately gestured for his companions to join him in this magnificent feast.
That night, the predator became the prey, and the apes tasted meat for the very first time.
This was the first time they had ever eaten meat.
Lingmo, observing this civilization, recorded this monumental moment.
He wrote it down in his observation log. The transition from eating wild fruits to meat was like opening Pandora's box. From this day on, meat would officially be added to their diet. Having discovered how delicious meat was, they would naturally go out of their way to hunt for it. Slowly but surely, meat would become a staple of their diet, and the rich energy packed within that meat would fuel the rapid development of an even more terrifying cheat code.
And that cheat code was the brain. Meanwhile, in the Gobog Nation's livestream chat, people were protesting loudly. This is a total cheat.
Living creatures are only supposed to attack with their own claws and teeth.
What are we supposed to do with these stupid monkeys? Damn it. How dare those brainless monkeys actually eat saber-toothed tiger meat? How do they even have the guts?
Saber-toothed tigers are their natural predators. For Pete's sake, I can't take this anymore.
Why hasn't our saber-toothed tiger pack gathered yet? If just a few hundred saber-toothed tigers charge together, they'll tear those apes to shreds.
On the projection screen, the ground apes were feasting on the saber-toothed tiger's flesh. The delicious taste of meat brought absolute satisfaction to every single ape. But for the viewers of Gabon country, this scene was like pouring gasoline on a fire. In almost an instant, a massive wave of viewers from Dragon Country flooded into Gabon Country's private livestream room. Hey, isn't that our big bro, the saber-toothed tiger? It's only been a short while. Why are you lying on the ground? Is it nice and cool down there on the ground? Are you not allowed to sleep inside our ape's cave? Look at how much those apes are enjoying their meal.
It's seriously making my mouth water.
I wonder what saber-toothed tiger meat actually tastes like.
Meanwhile, a fierce debate was raging inside Gablebang Country's Earth Archives research group. The research director furrowed his brow and muttered, "Those apes must have also been subjected to an active intervention. But how on earth did Dragon Country's civilization observer pull it off?
Can we replicate it? If those apes can learn to throw rocks?
Is it possible for our saber-toothed tigers to achieve something similar through active intervention?"
The researchers exchanged looks of helplessness.
Then, a wave of sighs filled the room. Obviously, it was impossible.
One researcher spoke up helplessly. Given the physical build of a saber-toothed tiger,
Trying to unlock a throwing skill is an absolute pipe dream. They are on completely different evolutionary paths.
if we recklessly modify them, now,
Putting aside whether we could even match the ape's performance,
tampering with the saber-toothed tiger's physical stats, just for a moderately useful skill, might trigger some unforeseen catastrophic glip. After careful consideration,
the Gilbon research director couldn't help but shake his head. Since it's not possible, we won't waste our time on it.
then the director added, "The main reason our saber-toothed tigers lost this time."
And thinking by the terrain, the cave is simply too cramped. It was nearly impossible to dodge the rocks those monkeys were hurling. If this had happened on the open savanna,
The outcome would have been completely different.
at the very least, a saber-toothed tiger wouldn't be hunted down so easily.
After all, the lethality of rocks is ultimately limited.
So, those apes still don't stand a chance against saber-toothed tigers. In the territory where the hominins live, the number of saber-toothed tigers is skyrocketing. This will only squeeze the hominins' living space even further. Their ultimate extinction is now just a matter of time. After all, the physical advantages of a saber-toothed tiger aren't something that can be overcome simply by throwing a few rocks.
Right now, the saber-toothed tigers still hold an absolute crushing advantage.
On the sky screen, the footage continues to fast forward.
By this point, the very first hominin to throw a rock has slowly risen to become the leader of the pack.
He seems to possess a natural charisma and leadership that ordinary hominins completely lack. Leading nearly 20 of his fellow hominins, he steps out of the cave. For the first time, they appear on the sky screen as a true, unified pack. It's midday, and the sun is beating down at its most brutal. More than 20 hominins moving together makes for a remarkably massive group.
Naturally, this draws the attention of the surrounding wildlife.
But right now, those creatures are staring at this massive pack with utter bewilderment. To them, this is definitely not a good sign.
In their eyes,
The danger level of these monkeys has suddenly begun to skyrocket.
even some solitary predators freeze in their tracks for a moment, completely stunned by the hominins' imposing lineup. The hominins no longer act like they used to. They no longer have to creep around in fear just to travel. This is the sheer security of having each other's backs.
And the hominins are slowly falling in love with this feeling.
Their destination lies outside the forest.
To get there, they have to cross a small plain.
The entire trek is about 3 kilometers, and out there lies a fertile fruit grove.
It's filled with the hard-shelled nuts that these hominins absolutely love to eat.
Right now, it's peak harvesting season.
The leader bends down and picks up a perfectly sized stone from the roots of a tree. The look of excitement flashes across his face.
He immediately waves his arms, signaling his companions to grab some stones to carry with them. These rocks are their ultimate lifelines.
But unfortunately, they only have 2 hands. Even if they cradle them in their arms, they can only carry so many.
Still, it should be more than enough to scare off any approaching predators.
Once their stones are ready,
The Haman leader is just about to set off.
when his eyes suddenly catch a 1-meter-long branch lying at the foot of a tree. The branch is about as thick as a wrist. It looks like it was snapped off.
By some animal dwelling up in the trees. He stares at the branch, completely mesmerized.
Then, as if a sudden spark of inspiration hits him, he bends down and picks it up. Under the puzzled gazes of his fellow hominins, he suddenly lifts the wooden club and swings it hard, slicing through the air with a sharp, whistling whoosh. Its power seemed impressive. The Ardipithecus leader's eyes lit up. He immediately raised the wooden club to show his companions behind him. Compared to stones,
The wooden club seemed to be much more useful.
furthermore, the evolved Ardipithecus didn't just unlock the throwing skill. With a wider range of shoulder motion and greater torso rotational power, they could swing a wooden club like a cracking whip, making incredibly powerful. The Ardipithecus apes had no idea where this sudden change came from. All they knew was that they seemed to have discovered a whole new world. At this moment, the Dragon Nation's live stream chat was filled with a warm, nostalgic vibe. I feel like I'm looking at my younger self. Seriously, what kid could resist picking up a perfect stick on the side of the road and swinging it around like a sword? Going from total despair when they first saw these apes, to now, the viewers genuinely began to feel that this group of Ardipithecus was truly special, though they couldn't quite put their finger on what made them so different. As the broadcast continued, the other apes stared at the magnificent wooden club in their leader's hand, listening to the fierce whooshing sound it made as he swung it through the air. The rest of the pack immediately realized how extraordinary this tool was. Some of the cleverest ones immediately began scouring the area for fallen branches and sticks. Just like that, the pack of apes stood ready, dragging massive wooden clubs in one hand and clutching fist-sized rocks in the other. As they marched out of the forest and onto the open plains once again,
The commotion made by over 20 apes descending the mountain was massive.
It instantly drew the attention of the saber-toothed tigers roaming the savannah.
At least 3 or 4 predators immediately locked onto their tracks. Over in the Gabang research lab, the team leader sat up straight, his face dripping with disdain. This time, out on the open plains. Let's see you try to escape the claws of those saber-toothed tigers.
On the wide-open savannah,
The throwing skills the apes were so proud of would be practically useless. There was no way they'd survive this.
But on the broadcast screen,
Saber-toothed tigers merely stalked the apes from a distance, observing them. Even after the apes reached their destination and entered the fruit grove, the predators still didn't attack. The Gabang research director was practically foaming at the mouth, screaming, "Go! Attack!
pounce on them already.
shatter those monkey skulls with your massive claws.
They're just a bunch of helpless monkeys." But right then, 2 of the saber-toothed tigers lost their patience entirely. They turned and headed in another direction, having spotted much better prey. A Cimetherium, a massive giraffe beast.
It had 2 banana-shaped horns.
Long, slender limbs,
And a massive build.
more than enough to give the saber-toothed tigers a massive feast. Half an hour later, apes had finally eaten and drunk their fill. Clutching plenty of fresh fruit, they prepared to head back.
Because they hadn't faced a single attack on the way there,
Deep had let their guard down significantly. Their neat formation began to drift and scatter, and the perfect opportunity the predators had been waiting for finally arrived. 2 saber-toothed tigers lay in ambush on the right side of the grove, each locking onto a different target. One of them, starving and impatient, completely ignored its partner and charged ahead on its own. The other saber-toothed tiger seemed to have much more patience, but the tiger that charged had already exposed their position. Left with no choice, the other tiger had to charge out as well. Suddenly, the sound of heavy paws thundering across the vast savannah caught the attention of the Ardipithecus apes. One of them failed to react in time and was instantly pinned to the ground. Sharp claws ripped right through its chest. The agonizing pain made it scream. This brutal sight instantly sparked wild cheers in the Gabong livestream room. The research director of Gabog jumped right out of his seat with excitement. But on the broadcast screen, a heavy stone suddenly flew through the air at lightning speed. It slammed right into the saber-toothed tiger. The saber-toothed tiger jerked its head to dodge, barely avoiding a direct hit. In the next instant, a barrage of stones rained down on him. Panicking, it shook its head and immediately bolted. The moment the saber-toothed tiger retreated,
The other Ardipithecus apes rushed forward.
dragging their injured companion back into the safety of the group. The research director of Gabong stared in utter disbelief. Was this some kind of joke? They're just throwing a few stones. What is there to be afraid of? Just bite that damn monkey to death and drag it away. He was losing his mind. The reality was not following his script at all. Aren't saber-toothed tigers supposed to be the most powerful apex predators? Why on earth are they so cowardly? By now, that saber-toothed tiger had already fled the scene. It only dared to stop after running dozens of meters away. Fear and shock filled its wide, round eyes. But it wasn't the only one launching an attack just now. The second tiger had been forced to strike as well. However, because the first tiger had already alerted the herd, the second tiger couldn't make a clean instant kill. Its target was the Ardipithecus leader, walking at the very front. But having already been alerted, the leader threw a heavy stone directly at the pouncing tiger. The saber-toothed tiger leapt to the side, avoiding the stone aiming straight for its face. Immediately after, it pounced a second time. The ape leader quickly adjusted its stance, gripping the massive wooden club tightly with both hands. It swung with all its might, slamming the club right into the tiger's head. At that moment, the saber-toothed tiger got a serious reality check. It couldn't comprehend how this mere ape suddenly possessed such a hard, devastating weapon. The saber-toothed tiger began to back away and retreat, while the Ardipithecus leader pressed forward, determined to drive the predator away for good. Eventually, the other apes began to close in, and this saber-toothed tiger finally abandoned the hunt, quickly retreating far away from the ape pack. The crisis had finally passed. Both saber-toothed tigers had been driven away. This was the first time these apes had successfully stood their ground and fought back against a saber-toothed tiger on the open savannah. Although one ape was injured in the clash, they managed to survive and escape the predator's jaws safely. This experience was a monumental milestone for the entire species. It meant they no longer had to live in constant terror. From this moment on, the Ardipithecus had officially entered the arena to compete with the saber-toothed tigers. On the projection screen, the injured Ardipithecus bared its teeth in agonizing pain, a horrific bloody gash across its chest catching everyone's eyes. The power of the Machairodus was simply too overwhelming. A single swipe from those muscular forelimbs and razor-sharp claws had caused severe internal damage to the ape's organs. In the past, once an Ardipithecus sustained an injury this severe, it was basically a death sentence. But now, things were different. The Ardipithecus had finally developed a tribal consciousness. A series of crises and the sheer struggle for survival had taught them that they could only live longer by sticking together. Therefore, as long as there were companions around, this injured Ardipithecus would not lose its life. With the help of its companions, the injured Ardipithecus was carried away. The massive group of over 20 Ardipithecus began their journey back. Having just survived an attack,
The Ardipithecus were now on high alert.
an ambush by two Machairodus was already incredibly difficult to handle, and this was the prime feeding time for most creatures. An dangerous hour, when deadly predators ruled the plains. The grasslands were teeming with life, with more and more beasts emerging. In the distance, herds of deer-like cervids could be seen gathering. And of course, there were signs of saber-toothed tigers. On their journey back, the Ardipithecus group was ambushed twice by predators. The first was another pack of Machairodus. They targeted 3 Ardipithecus, but were spotted early. The Ardipithecus threw stones first to drive them off. The second threat came from a pack of giant hyenas roaming nearby. These were the creatures Sakata fruit was currently observing. Their traces could be found in this region as well. They were quite numerous, numbering around 20. But even the giant hyenas couldn't figure out what tactics these gathered apes were using. So the two sides engaged in a tense standoff. After snarling and roaring at each other, both sides eventually backed away. Clearly, even the giant hyenas knew to only pick on the weak. After all, most creatures would flee or cower in fear when they saw them. But this group of apes was different. They actually dared to roar back at the giant hyenas.
Confronted with such a defiant opponent, even the giant hyena pack chose not to risk a fight.
Compared to the ground apes, the giant hyenas much preferred hunting down large herbivores. Right then, as the ground apes made their way into a lush, dense jungle, their leader suddenly froze. As if noticing something, he slowly turned his gaze toward a thick patch of bushes nearby.
A faint rustling sound was coming from the undergrowth.
As if something was hiding deep inside. Instantly, the ape leader grew vigilant. He looked back to check what supplies his companions had left, only to find they had completely run out of stones. The leader then scanned the ground beneath him, only to spot a fresh, clear trail of blood winding its way directly into the bushes.
He didn't understand what the blood meant.
So, he picked up a large, dry clump of dirt and hurled it right into the bushes. The very next second, a massive figure lunged out of the brush. Those familiar patterns, that colossal size, and those razor-sharp fangs. In an instant, the look in every ape's eyes completely changed. Their hair stood dead on end. Leaping out from the bushes was none other than a Machairodus, a short-fanged saber-toothed tiger. It was one of the 4 saber-tooths that had targeted the ground apes when they first set foot on the savannah. But back then, it had lost its patience, turning around to hunt the much easier to catch the Thamarium instead. Right now, this saber-tooth looked absolutely ferocious. Its maw was dripping with fresh, glistening blood, and shreds of raw meat were still dangling from its teeth. It was clearly in the middle of a feast that had just been rudely interrupted. This had made the saber-tooth absolutely furious, but even so, it had no intention of abandoning its food in the bushes. It had eaten less than 1/4 of it, and there was no way it was leaving it behind. It took a threatening step forward, arched its powerful back, and let out a savage roar. It wanted to scare off these cowardly monkeys. In the past, this tactic had always worked. On this savannah, no creature dared to stand up to a saber-tooth, not even the pack-hunting giant hyenas. But these ground apes had already faced death at the hands of saber-tooths multiple times in a short span. So, instead of backing down, they bared their teeth and roared right back at the apex predator.
Over 20 ground apes roared in unison, and some even began wildly waving the massive wooden clubs in their hands.
This sudden display of defiance completely threw the saber-tooth off. He let out another greedy roar,
But in the next second, the roars of the ground apes grew even louder,
completely drowning out his voice. The massive saber-toothed tiger couldn't help but shrink back a step. He cast a reluctant, lingering glance at the bushes
before turning and quickly slipping away.
Watching this play out on the sky screen,
The viewers from Galbaum really couldn't take it anymore. Are you kidding me? What on earth is going on with these monkeys?
why have our legendary saber-toothed tigers suddenly become so cowardly? It was bad enough that they got chased off before.
But now they're letting these damn monkeys steal their food.
This is an absolute disgrace.
My God, what is our civilization observer even doing? The saber-toothed tiger is such a powerful species. How could they be forced to retreat by a bunch of monkeys? In the next scene on the sky screen, as the saber-toothed tiger turned and slunk away, the ground apes finally breathed a sigh of relief. The leader of the ground apes stepped forward and parted the thick bushes. There, a partially eaten carcass of a Cimetherium lay quietly hidden in the brush.
This was a massive herbivore,
With an average body length of over 4 meters and a shoulder height of over 2 meters, it was actually even larger than a saber-toothed tiger. Ground ape leader was absolutely thrilled. He immediately let out low, excited coos to call his companions over. 2 ground apes hoisted the heavy Cimetherium onto their shoulders, one at the front and one at the back. This Cimetherium carcass would easily feed them for 2 days, carrying the fruits they had harvested from the forest
And lugging their scavenged meat.
The group of ground apes happily left the area. The rapid spike in the saber-toothed tiger population made the competition among predators here increasingly brutal.
The ripple effects of so many saber-toothed tigers gathering in one place were already starting to show.
As the timeline of Earth Online continued to accelerate, the competition on this continent grew more and more brutal over time.
High above the continent's sky, the massive Argentine giant eagles still dominated the heavens.
They were the species observed by the U.S. Civilization Observer. David,
They were the absolute rulers of the sky. Their massive wingspan alone reached a staggering 6 meters,
And their top flight speed could reach up to 70 kilometers per hour.
once an aerial beast like this dived down from the high clouds to most creatures on the ground, it was an attack that was absolutely impossible to defend against. And what was even more terrifying was that because the Argentine giant eagle was so massive, and because of this, it had virtually no natural predators.
To the American viewers, this was absolutely one of the top contenders to dominate the world in this current version.
Every single one of its stats screamed that potential. In the final evaluation of Earth Online, there are 3 major criteria. First, at the time of version settlement, is the observed species still alive? Second,
How large is the population of the observed species? And third, how vast is the territory they inhabit?
these 3 criteria are the key factors for the rankings.
But the American audience gradually realized that while these giant birds were incredibly powerful and had no natural predators,
Their reproduction rate was painfully slow. Normal creatures usually go into heat and mate as soon as the weather gets warm.
but these giant birds, they only reproduced once every 2 years. Because of this, the US was already considering using an intervention chance to actively change this situation. As time fast forward, Earth Online entered a new year.
By then, the population of the saber-toothed tigers had reached a terrifying number of over 1,000.
With such a massive number of apex predators crammed into a single area,
A vast number of other creatures were affected. Some weaker species were even hunted to total extinction by the saber-tooths. In an environment like this, the survival of the ground apes was inevitably threatened.
those saber-tooths had even begun encroaching into the mountains.
The risk for the ground apes going out to forage skyrocketed. But then, as mating season arrived, the massive gathering of saber-tooths began fighting viciously among themselves for the right to mate, because only by winning could they pass on their genes.
Outside the sky screen, the South Korean viewers watched this, their hearts in their throats. Every single one of those tigers was their absolute baby. On screen, the battle was brutal. A victorious male saber-tooth didn't even have time to roar in triumph before the other surrounding males immediately pounced on him.
Meanwhile, not far behind a fallen saber-tooth, a sneaky little group of figures was creeping closer.
It was the ground apes, out to forage.
They were being extremely cautious. Every single one of them held wooden clubs and stones,
Their eyes locked onto the saber-tooth, still tearing each other apart nearby.
The saber-tooth on the ground was drawing its final breaths. As it weakly lifted its head,
A massive wooden club filled its entire field of vision.
in the next second, several ground apes swarmed the beast, hoisted the carcass onto their shoulders, and ran like hell.
The entire South Korean livestream chat exploded. Those cowardly rats! They don't dare face the mighty saber-tooths head on. Yet they resort to such shameless, dirty tricks. The Korean viewers absolutely could not stand this. South Korea had originally used their intervention opportunity precisely to gather a massive pack of saber-tooths to wipe those damn monkeys out once and for all. And now, the saber-toothed tigers have finally gathered.
But before they could even lay a claw on those monkeys,
The saber-tooths started tearing each other apart.
fine, let them fight.
After all, it is just an internal conflict.
Even there are losers, it is still somewhat acceptable. But those ground apes actually snuck in while the saber-tooths were in a brutal free-for-all and snatched an easy victory. Meanwhile, inside Gobang's Earth Research Task Force,
The team leader slammed his fist onto the table.
Mating season.
it is completely normal for male animals to fight. But the current level of infighting among these saber-tooths has clearly gone way beyond normal limits. If this keeps up,
Forget about wiping out the ground apes or any other creature in the containment zone.
the saber-tooths will decimate their own kind. In the end, we still know far too little about these beasts.
The Gobang team leader's words silenced the entire research facility.
No one expected that a single intervention would lead to such disastrous consequences.
This was a scenario most of them had never even considered.
Is there any way to fix this now?
If we want a permanent solution,
We have no choice but to use another intervention to reset everything.
but if we do that,
All our previous efforts will have been completely in vain.
the team leader looked up at the sky screen.
His voice was thick with a deep sense of helplessness. Sometimes, he truly wondered, is it too reckless to hand the fate of an entire nation over to a randomly selected candidate? Now, it all depends on whether Kim Tae-hoon can realize the gravity of the situation.
The sky screen broadcast continued.
For the ground,
Apes, this saber-tooth civil war was like opening the door to a whole new world. They realized that these once terrifying apex predators seemed to have no interest in them anymore.
they were all too busy fighting each other to mate.
And that saber-toothed tiger they dragged back was their first meal of fresh meat in months. Compared to the half-rotted carrion they usually scavenged, this tasted infinitely better.
The ground apes simply couldn't get enough of it.
One day, just like any other, the ground apes headed out to forage. By chance, they stumbled upon an injured saber-toothed tiger lapping water at the lakeside.
The beast bore several horrific, highly visible scars across its body. The blood around its wounds had already turned black.
It was clearly a loser of the mating wars. Seeing the isolated beast, The ground apes finally found the courage to close in for the kill.
That saber-tooth truly had no strength left to fight back.
It could only watch in despair as dozens of monkeys launched their attack from a deadly distance of 10 to 20 meters. Only at this moment did this former apex predator truly taste the bitter flavor of despair.
And just like that, it was beaten to death right there by the lake. Only after making absolutely sure it had stopped moving completely did the hominid leader step forward, using a heavy wooden club to poke the head of the saber-toothed tiger.
The hominid leader let out an excited roar.
The other hominids quickly gathered around, raising their heavy wooden clubs and cheering over the carcass of the saber-toothed tiger.
It seemed to be their way of expressing joy.
Because they had successfully hunted down a saber-toothed tiger.
Some of the hominids were already salivating, swallowing their spit.
At the call of their leader, the group of hominids hoisted the carcass onto their shoulders and carried it back to the cave.
As the sun dipped below the horizon,
The orange-gold light cast long, stretched-out shadows of their figures. The grand procession filed along the narrow path, entering the mountains,
until they completely vanished from sight. Inside the virtual space, Lane Mo's pen came to a halt on his notebook. He took a deep breath, a look of quiet emotion in his eyes. He silently watched the hominids, who had grown from cowardly creatures into brave hunters, step by step.
From their first time scavenging leftovers to their second time executing a coordinated hunt,
The hominids had grown bolder and bolder.
they rarely went searching for those hard, wild fruits anymore. Now, when they went out foraging, they actually started to venture toward the habitats of the saber-toothed tigers on their own accord.
Sometimes they could even be seen lurking nearby while two saber-toothed tigers fought,
Waiting just a short distance away to reap the rewards after the beasts finished tearing each other apart.
This alone perfectly demonstrated the extraordinary adaptability unique to these hominids.
The key to this adaptation lay in their continuously developing brains.
Inside the virtual space,
Lin Mo sat in his seat, watching the hominids with great interest.
perhaps due to their growing experience, the hominids were becoming far more skilled. While feeling gratified, Lin Mo was also pondering the next stage of evolution for the hominids. The hominids had already begun to form basic, albeit blurry, social structures. With a strong enough capacity to adapt, the throwing skill unlocked,
And a certain level of cognitive ability.
these fundamentals only gave them the bare minimum to survive and reproduce.
To truly claim the throne as the rulers of this world, they were still missing some crucial elements, like the use of tools.
Ideas flooded Lin Mo's mind like an open sluice gate.
But right then, a large hand slammed down hard onto his desk.
He looked up to see Kim Tai-hoon standing before him, his face contorted with rage.
You people from the Dragon Kingdom, don't you think you've gone too far?
Lin Mo stood up from his seat with a calm smile,
Looking down at Kim Tae-yo from his superior height.
What's the matter?
Losing your cool already?
Want to throw down with me? Kim Tae-hoon hadn't even noticed at first that the guy in front of him actually had a pretty well-built frame. Since he was just an ordinary guy himself and was a whole size smaller, he really might not stand a chance against him in a fight. On top of that, they were inside the virtual space of the Earth cavity,
Where physical violence between civilization observers was strictly forbidden.
Kim Tae-woo gritted his teeth, desperate to salvage some of his pride.
Bracing himself, he spat. Isn't it because those monkeys your dragon country is observing can do nothing but hide?
If you've got the balls, face us head on.
What kind of coward relies on sneak attacks? Lenmo let out a sharp, mocking laugh and pointed to his head. Once you get out of here, I highly suggest you go get this checked.
Do you seriously think this is a game? You expect people to play by your rules?
This is survival.
To survive, absolutely no method is off the table. And besides, you're trying to talk about rules to a pack of wild beasts.
Linmo shook his head, sitting back down in his seat. If there's nothing else, you can go back now.
Sting here does absolutely nothing except put your incompetence and insecurity on full display.
It's completely pointless. Next time you show up, I suggest you wear a red nose.
It suits your character perfectly.
Tae-hoon felt like the volcano inside him was about to erupt.
But as he looked around,
He realized the civilization observers from other countries had all turned their eyes toward him.
and every single look was filled with mockery. Just as Lin-mo had said, standing there made him look exactly like a clown. Fine. Lin-mo, you just wait.
Relying on cheap tricks means absolutely nothing.
Monkeys will always be monkeys. One day, the saber-toothed tigers will make those monkeys regret everything they've done.
Ki Dae-him stormed back to his seat.
On the massive screen above, he watched the death toll rise as hordes of saber-toothed tigers clashed violently over mating rights. He took a deep, heavy breath. He couldn't let the situation keep spiraling like this.
Once again, Kim Tae-hoon decided to take matters into his own hands and intervene.
At the same time, he opted for external assistance. And so Kim Tae-hoon re-established contact with Gaebong Country's Earth Archive Research Group. Director Kim Young-jun, can you hear me?
It's Kim Tae-hoo.
What do we do now? Can't let the saber-toothed tigers keep tearing each other apart in this civil war. Kim Young-jun let out a small sigh of relief.
Thank goodness you chose to ask for external help.
We've been watching the situation unfold, and it's true. We were far too reckless.
We at the Research Center have also discussed and analyzed this thoroughly. To resolve our current situation, there might only be one way left, and that is, we must stop the saber-toothed tigers from gathering in such massive numbers.
But Team Leader Kim? If we do that, wouldn't we be wasting 2 of our active intervention opportunities for absolutely nothing? We won't gain a single thing,
And on top of that, we've already lost so many of our saber-toothed tigers. More importantly, those hominids haven't even been affected that much. You must have seen it too. Those monkeys are getting bolder and bolder by the day. They actually had the nerve to ambush a saber-toothed tiger. Suddenly, Kim Tae-hoon seemed to think of something.
Team Leader Kim, maybe we can find a compromise. I still have 2 active intervention opportunities left.
How about we find a way to wipe out those hominids first?
And then let everything return to how it was? After all, our saber-toothed tigers are strong enough. Even if we don't have any opportunities to actively intervene later on, I don't think our final ranking will be low.
Hearing this, Youngjun shook his head. It's too hard to pull off.
To wipe out the hominids, we'd at least have to wait until the mating season is over.
But who knows how many more saber-toothed tigers will die in the meantime?
We've already paid a heavy price. It's not just the losses from this internal conflict, but also the losses caused by their mass migration.
That's no small number either. Saber-toothed tigers don't have a high reproductive rate to begin with. Just recovering from our current situation is going to take a very long time.
We can't afford to drag this out any longer. Then what if we intervene specifically in their mating season?
I've been watching those monkeys, and I noticed that while almost every species is entering their mating season right now,
They're the only ones who seem completely unaffected. So, can we take a page out of their book and hide our saber-toothed tigers Estrustus?
Think Tae-hoon felt like he had finally found the root of the problem.
The main reason the saber-toothed tigers are clashing on such a massive scale right now
Is largely due to the arrival of their mating season.
If we can interfere with the female saber-toothed tigers Estrustus,
Wouldn't that effectively curb the fighting among the males?
After some serious thought, Kim Youngjun still shook his head. I don't think that's a good idea.
First of all, can you guarantee that the hominids will be wiped out? Those monkeys have become much more cunning now, and that definitely has everything to do with the Dragon Nation's civilization observer.
That guy isn't as simple as we think.
He won't just sit back and do nothing.
Secondly, regarding your proposal to intervene in their mating season,
The heat cycle is simply too critical. It is an ironclad law of species reproduction. If we hide the signs of being in heat, the most likely consequence is that females will stop sending out mating signals.
Without that trigger,
males won't feel the urge to mate either.
At that point, reproduction is left entirely to chance. For any species, that would be an absolute death sentence.
Hearing Kim Yo-jun's explanation,
Kim Tae-hoon grew even more confused. If things are really as you say,
then what on earth is going on with those monkeys?
Kim Young shook his head, looking just as baffled.
We have no way of knowing exactly what modifications Lin Mo made to those Earth apes.
but if you ask me, this might just be a side effect of his tampering.
Who's to say Lin Mo's tinkering didn't just screw up their hormone levels permanently?
After all, he messed with their most fundamental genetic data. Anything could happen after a stunt like that.
We might not even need to lift a finger against those Earth apes. Since they lost their mating season, it won't be long before they face a breeding crisis and drive themselves to extinction.
So why should we waste any more time on them?
Kim Youngjar's words were a massive wake-up call for Kim Tae-hoon. Haha, and I bet that idiot Lin Mo hasn't even realized it yet. The bastard is still busy laughing at our saber-toothed tigers.
He has absolutely no idea what a massive trap he's dug for himself.
The more he thought about it,
The better Kim Tae-hoon felt.
he glanced over at Lin Mo and sneered.
Go ahead and laugh.
Keep laughing while you can. Let's see if you're still smiling once you realize what you've done.
Recoaching
Is no joke. A species that can't reproduce will go extinct in just 1 or 2 generations. We're talking mere decades.
By the time you notice that no new offspring are being born to those Earth apes,
It will be too late. Keith Tae-hoon felt a wave of relief wash over him, and he stopped stressing. Right now, cutting their losses was the top priority.
meanwhile, Lin Mo couldn't care less about Kim Tae-hoon.
He was busy planning the next phase of evolution for the Earth apes. As for the reproduction issue,
Ningmo wasn't worried in the slightest.
Kim Youngjo and the others were only half right. Ever since the Earth apes learned to walk upright, everything had changed.
Bipedalism made childbirth incredibly difficult,
Which meant female apes had to form partnerships with males just to survive. The very concept of family began to take root.
But raising offspring alone wasn't enough to keep a male loyal to a female's side.
And so, throughout their evolutionary journey, natural selection favored a far more efficient path for the female's genes.
And that was to break free from the constraints of a set mating season.
To suppress the extreme hormone spikes of estrustus, and to conceal any obvious physical signs of being in heat. In fact, it was from this exact point
That Ardipithecus began its slow, steady transition into humans.
Well, wasn't that the female apes didn't experience heat? Rather, just like humans, they felt a clear surge of desire when ovulation approached. These Ardipithecus no longer needed the biological alarm of a mating season to signal fertility. Even the female apes had no idea when they were at their most fertile.
Under these conditions,
Since there was no telling when the critical moment for reproduction would be,
males who wanted to pass on their lineage.
could no longer just wait around for a brief breeding window like other wild beasts.
Instead, they had to stay by the female's side, constantly guarding and protecting her.
This behavior laid the foundation for a much stronger, more stable concept of family. On the other hand, creatures like saber-toothed tigers have a highly distinct breeding window. When that window opens, almost every male is forced into a brutal struggle to secure a mate. But because Ardipithecus concealed their fertile window, the before-your-death rivalry between males plummeted,
They no longer had to tear each other to pieces just to win a female. Instead, it fostered a peaceful, cooperative society within their group. This brilliant evolutionary trick of concealed estrusness turned violent competition into stable, peaceful bonding. And with that, the concept of family became unbreakable. All of this was a forced evolutionary response to the birthing crisis, brought on by walking upright.
Qin Yarnjun would never have dreamed of this.
After all, he would never believe that a bunch of low-level beasts could ever develop a family concept unique to humans. But at its core, it all came down to that rapidly growing, developing brain. It is no exaggeration to say that although the Ardipithecus brain was still very primitive at this stage,
It was already light years ahead of any other creature of their era.
it was this brain, far superior to any of its contemporaries, that gifted these early hominids with the capacity for basic thought. Because they could think. These early hominids understood what they were doing and why. Even if saber-toothed tigers could somehow hide their stress signals, a male saber-tooth would still never form a concept of family. Their primitive brains simply couldn't support that level of cognitive awareness. To them, others were just competitors of the same species.
They might tolerate their own kind without killing them.
But caring for or helping their offspring was virtually non-existent. They would even turn on each other to fight over food.
The strong ate their fill first, and the weak only got the scraps.
And now Gohang has officially decided to launch its second active intervention. An artificial, subjective thought had already been implanted right into the brains of these saber-toothed tigers. This forced a massive number of these saber-tooths to seek out whatever environment their subconscious deemed most comfortable. And that environment? It was defined entirely by the civilization observers of the Gebang state. This was the core logic the Gebang state used to herd these beasts together. But now, this entire system has glitched. If they wanted to fix it, they had no choice but to wipe out this implanted subconscious concept. And that brings us to a new problem. Once that subconscious concept is completely erased, every single behavior of these saber-toothed tigers will revert entirely to raw instinct. But for most creatures, their memory modules are completely fragmented. So, trying to get those saber-tooths to return to their original habitats? It's basically a lost cause. Once the interference was lifted, these saber-toothed tigers had absolutely no idea what had just happened to them. They didn't even know why they had traveled so far across mountains and rivers to reach this new land. But hey, since they were already there,
Why waste massive amounts of energy trying to crawl back to their old homeland?
it made much more sense to just settle down right where they were. Besides, they probably didn't even remember where they came from in the first place.
And let's not forget, these saber-toothed tigers are among the most powerful apex predators on this continent.
Which means they can adapt to almost any ecological environment this land throws at them. Looking at their distribution across the map, these beasts were originally scattered across the entire continent. And where teeming with life, you'd find their tracks. But after the Gubayang state's ridiculous interference, the saber-tooths abandoned their homelands and swarmed toward the southern territory where the Diwan resided. This massive migration dragged on for nearly 6 months. During those long months, the vast majority of the saber-toothed tigers had already made it to the south. Some were practically on the doorstep of the Diwan's habitat, and there was no way these predators were going back north. The map now showed a massive concentration of these beasts in the south. Meanwhile, the timeline on the sky screen began to fast forward. As time sped up, the new changes in the saber-tooths became clearer and clearer. And sure enough, most of the saber-toothed tigers chose to stay right where they were, refusing to take another step forward, but never backing down either. Only a tiny handful eventually drifted back north, but that was a mere drop in the bucket for the rest of the pack. Meanwhile, the number of saber-toothed tigers in the Diwan's territory began to drop significantly. The brutal wars of the mating season were long over. Over the course of a single month, the saber-tooth had suffered a loss of over 300 beasts. Most of them were the losers of those savage fights, cast out of the pack with festering wounds, doomed to die as their injuries got worse. As for the remaining 700, a good number of them ended up scattered in search of food. In the end, the number of saber-tooths remaining in this area stabilized at around 200 to 300, splitting into several packs of various sizes, reigning as the undisputed absolute kings of this entire territory. It didn't take long for Lin Mo to notice the sudden shift in the saber-tooths' behavior. As a civilization observer, he could clearly see how the layout of the entire continent was shifting. Judging by the unusual behavior of the saber-toothed cats, he understood exactly what Gaopambo was up to. However, this also shifted Yang Chen's thinking. If the number of saber-toothed cats kept growing, and the ground apes didn't actively migrate on their own, then I'll have to initiate another active intervention to forcefully boost the evolutionary speed of the ground apes so they can withstand the worsening environment. The sheer number of saber-toothed cats could indeed threaten the currently fragile ground apes. But since the Gaobango side couldn't hold out and made a move first, Lin Mo naturally didn't need to do anything redundant.
He had already mapped out the steps for the ground ape's evolution.
Following the plan step by step would be more than enough to crown the ground apes as the rulers of the world in this current patch. Since the external threats had lessened significantly, Lin Mo naturally wouldn't rush things prematurely. His next active intervention would still require a perfect opportunity, an opportunity created by the ground apes themselves. Things went quickly, it could take a few hundred years. If they went slowly, it might take thousands or even tens of thousands of years. But the timeline of this version was set during the Neogene period, and there were still over 1 million years left before the Neogene period came to an end. With such a vast stretch of time, he had more than enough patience to wait for that opportunity to arrive. On the sky screen, everything seemed to have returned to its proper track. The ground apes living in the caves gradually noticed that their sharp-fanged natural predators outside were rarely fighting among themselves anymore. Their previous tactic of launching sneak attacks was gradually becoming obsolete.
The saber-toothed cats were no longer engaging in large-scale infighting, meaning the ground apes had fewer opportunities to scavenge easy meals. In fact, because the population of saber-toothed cats was maintained at around 200 to 300, the survival pressure on the ground apes actually increased significantly.
The saber-toothed cats had now gradually begun to adapt to living in packs.
The different packs still had conflicts with one another, each ruling over its own domain and dividing the entire region into several territories. This seemed like a natural selection, steering the ecosystem back to its ultimate balance. And so, a new law of survival emerged, one built primarily around the saber-toothed cats.
Within this region, the saber-toothed cats became the absolute rulers, sitting at the very apex of the ecosystem. Every other animal in this territory became nothing more than food for these predators.
While this was much better than the previous bloated gathering of over 1,000 saber-toothed cats, the pressure was still immense.
The mortality rate of most species living in this area skyrocketed. To escape these ferocious saber-toothed cats, the surviving animals gradually learned various ways to evade them,
but their population was still steadily declining.
Perhaps one day in the future, most of the creatures here would be driven to extinction because the predators were just too ferocious. But certainly not now. At least for now, this area had become a paradise for the saber-toothed cats, while most of the other species were barely scraping by.
And as for the ground apes, the most direct result was a massive drop in meat consumption.
Venturing outside became exponentially more dangerous.
Under this kind of intense pressure, gradually these ground apes found their own way to survive.
Their craving for meat was already hardwired into their very bones.
Giving it up?
Out of the question. Fortunately, these ground apes had already learned how to hunt in cooperative packs, even though their success rate was still incredibly low.
At least they had a new way forward.
Slowly, they began targeting medium to large-sized beasts. If a beast was too fast to chase down, they ambushed it. They would surround and hunt their prey while it was drinking water or eating. Sometimes they succeeded, and other times they went home empty-handed.
But win or lose, every attempt was a stepping stone, building up their experience.
As a result, these ground apes became more and more adept at pelting their targets with stones,
Clogging them with branches, and simply overwhelming them with sheer numbers. When a massive predator approached, they ran.
When they spotted leftovers from other species, they scavenged. If they crossed paths with a lone saber-toothed tiger, they would even dare to pick a fight to test their luck. Step by step, they became the ultimate scavengers of this land, hunters and master escape artists. In this brutal, bloody survival game called Earth Online, there was absolutely no room for pride.
These ground apes were, without a doubt, the underdogs.
But to achieve their ultimate goal, survival, these ground apes sacrificed absolutely everything. Their diet expanded from wild fruits and tree roots to carrion, bone marrow, and fresh meat, eating absolutely anything they could get their hands on. Everything they did was for one sole purpose: to extract more nutrients
And hoard more energy.
to sustain themselves.
And drive their evolution. Compared to their days of eating nothing but wild fruits, their current diet was vastly richer in nutrients.
Consequently, they found themselves with surplus energy. And so, the most powerful biological cheat code in history began to slowly swell. This seemed to be the core hardwired logic of their genetic code. While other beasts were still funneling their excess nutrients into building massive muscles, boosting physical strength, and maxing out their speed and agility, the DNA of these ground apes chose a completely unprecedented path. They cast aside everything else, deciding that good enough muscles were fine, and speed only needed to be fast enough to escape. A similar body size is more than enough. None of that actually matters. These ground apes had to bet absolutely everything on an organ that was practically useless in the beginning: the brain.
It was a massive gamble.
Developing a brain consumes an insane amount of energy.
And in the early stages, there was absolutely zero return.
It wouldn't give the ground apes the strength to match a saber-toothed tiger, nor the speed to run down fast prey.
It was like a bottomless pit.
Without giving anything back.
It selfishly drained massive amounts of the ape's energy. Other creatures, facing immense pressure from the environment, adapted and strengthened their bodies along their evolutionary paths, boosting their chances of survival.
Only the ground apes seemed to show no change at all. They still seemed just as weak and defenseless, and there was no way that brain, which swallowed so much of their energy, could offer them any means of survival at this stage. They had no choice but to endure, to grit their teeth and push through, bearing the terrifying pressure of deadly predators like the saber-toothed tigers. If they could survive, they survived. If they couldn't, they died. Fortunately, the apes seemed to have pulled through. They used every single trick in the book just to stay alive. Though they lived a humble, desperate existence, they kept growing.
They kept evolving.
Until, one day, a baby ape was born to the agonizing cries of his mother. He didn't look like anything special,
He was only a tiny bit smarter than his parents,
but his parents had already undergone generations of evolution.
and their brains were already visibly larger than those of the early ground apes.
This newborn ape's brain was just a fraction larger still, and that tiny fraction was enough to cross a critical threshold. His brain capacity exceeded 600 milliliters. From the common perspective of Lin Mo's previous life, a brain capacity of 600 milliliters is the benchmark. Once you cross that line, you can finally be called human. From the initial ground ape's brain capacity of around 400 milliliters
Today, to now breaking past the 600 milliliter mark.
These ancestral apes had undergone countless generations of evolution.
It's just that this evolutionary process had been cut short significantly because of Lin Mo's active intervention. Evolution is a long, grueling journey.
The result of generation after generation constantly optimizing their genes. It took countless generations for the ground apes to go from occasionally standing in the trees to mastering the art of walking upright.
And then to Lin Mo's active intervention, which unlocked the crucial skill of throwing,
and immediately began to drastically accelerate their evolutionary timeline.
under normal circumstances. It would have taken these Earth apes hundreds of thousands of years of evolution just to unlock the skill of throwing, but Lin Mo completely bypassed all of that. As a result, the apes were now able to secure far more food, giving them the resources they needed to evolve even further. It was just like a sudden tech boom. Once the right conditions fall into place, the breakthrough happens almost overnight. To be fair, by all normal standards, these creatures could no longer even be called Earth apes. Ever since they learned to walk upright and mastered throwing, they had entered the stage known in Lin Mo's past life as Australopithecus.
But since this was Earth, and the Earth apes were the species Lin Mo was observing,
We would still be called Earth apes, regardless of how much they evolved. In this version of the simulation, these apes and all their descendants were bound to the Dragon Kingdom. So for convenience, they were simply referred to as the ancestral apes. Among them, a newborn ape stood out, showing far more intelligence than any of his peers.
His unique traits were obvious from the moment he was born.
Well, his parents taught him survival skills through basic gestures and actions. He mastered them almost instantly. But what was truly shocking was his ability to do the unthinkable. He could actually command and lead the other apes.
during hunts, he could instantly spot the weakest point in their line.
And direct the others to strike. And when they were chased by predators,
He would signal the pack to scatter,
Confusing their pursuers.
even during food distribution. He made sure every single ape got a fair share.
Everything about this newborn screamed that he was destined for greatness.
As the years went by,
he earned the absolute trust of the entire pack, and eventually, he became the new leader of the Earth apes.
by now, a long time had passed since the saber-toothed tigers ruled this region. But because of these predators, the Earth ape tribe hadn't grown much, slowly rising from just a few dozen to between 1 and 200.
They kept an incredibly low profile in the area. To survive, they had to keep their heads down, doing everything they could to avoid the attention of large predators.
Aside from the essential hunting parties,
Most of the tribe would never leave those mountains in their entire lives.
Hiding in dark caves until the day they died.
Meanwhile, the saber-toothed tiger population in the region seemed completely unable to grow. Their numbers are still hovering around 200, although they are the rulers of this territory. Then
most other creatures are dwindling under the relentless hunting of these saber-toothed cats.
This scarcity of food makes it incredibly difficult for the saber-toothed cat population to grow.
The local ecosystem simply cannot sustain any more apex predators. Not only are the saber-tooths unable to expand,
But the populations of most other creatures are also in sharp decline, slowly edging toward extinction. Only the ground apes, with their bold yet cautious nature, their cooperation, and their extreme survival mode of eating absolutely anything, have quietly grown their numbers to over 100. The footage of these highly intelligent, border collie-like apes continues to play. Since the arrival of their new leader,
The ground apes' operational capabilities have reached a whole new level.
a good leader can drastically increase the survival rate of the entire clan. This has already been proven during the first few hunts under the new leader's command. It is now midday,
And is in time once again to forage for food.
under the guidance of their new leader. The ground apes foraging party has expanded from its original 20-odd members to 40 or 50. Because the new leader is highly capable of keeping more apes safe, the group was able to expand 40 to 50 apes, each armed with heavy wooden clubs and throwing stones. Just the sheer sight of a troop like this is incredibly intimidating. These ground apes no longer target wild fruits as their primary food source. Instead, they focus on hunting small mammals or targeting injured and isolated medium to large animals. The group of apes sets off from their cave, roaming through the mountain forests. Ever since the saber-toothed cats became the kings of this region, many other animals have been forced to retreat into the dense woods. After all, saber-toothed cats cannot climb trees. Even though they have tiger in their name, they are actually very different from the modern tigers we know. They are felines, but they belong to the specialized saber-toothed subfamily branch. In some ways, they are more like lions. Their inability to climb trees is exactly why the ground apes can consistently find food in the forest. Over time, these wooded mountains have become the ground apes' primary territory.
out on the grassy plains beyond the forest,
The ground apes rarely gather unless absolutely necessary, because several prides of saber-toothed cats roam those open plains. Just like any other day, it is completely normal to find absolutely nothing after a quick patrol of the forest.
Any animal that enters the forest becomes incredibly cunning.
They use the dense trees to effectively slow down any pursuers.
If they want to find food, they must be patient and search the area thoroughly. After all, hunting is always a game of luck.
But the new leader clearly has no intention of wasting more time in these woods.
Standing at the very edge of the forest,
He shields his eyes from the sun with his palm.
looking out over the flat grasslands ahead. The mountain forests might be safer, but food there is scarce. What's more, any prey is small, whereas the vast open savanna
Is home to giant beasts.
It's easier to find food there, but it's also far more dangerous. The leader glanced back at the companions following him and made a choice.
Without hesitation, he stepped onto the grassland.
With greater danger comes greater reward.
The tribe cannot survive without food. With greater danger comes greater reward. The tribe cannot survive without food.
Trusting their new leader, the ground apes followed him, stepping into this vast, grassy hell. Every single ape was filled with confidence, and fate, it seemed, favors the bold.
Once they entered the grasslands, the ground apes' luck took a turn for the better.
From afar, they noticed movement ahead. This area wasn't the territory of the scimitar-toothed cats,
But rather the domain of another pack-hunting species, the giant hyenas.
Even the scimitar-toothed cats wouldn't dare provoke these massive pack-hunting beasts. After all, the giant hyena pack was just as numerous as the cats.
In an all-out fight, the hyena pack might still lose, but the saber-toothed cats would pay a devastating price. So without a good reason to fight, neither side would ever cross into the other's territory.
And right now, this pack of giant hyenas seemed to have taken down a massive beast. A Dinotherians. It appeared to be a young Dinotherium that had fallen behind during the herd's migration. But even as a juvenile, its body stretched over 5 meters long. Targeted and swarmed to death by the hyenas, the pack was now happily tearing into their prize.
They had absolutely no idea that a troop of ground apes was already creeping up nearby. The new leader of the ground apes had a clear goal.
For safety's sake, they wouldn't fight these giant hyenas head-on.
Instead, they were going to steal the half-eaten Dinotherium carcass right from under their noses.
Under the new leader's command, the apes deployed a primitive but effective tactic. One group would draw the hyenas' attention and keep them at bay, while the other group used this brief distraction to rush straight for the Dinotherium carcass.
The apes had used this strategy several times before. By now, they shared a silent, perfect coordination.
Led by their new chief, one group grabbed heavy wooden clubs and began closing in on the giant hyenas, then raised stones in their hands, ready to strike their targets.
Inside the Sakura Nation's exclusive livestream room,
The audience was glued to the celestial screen, watching the broadcast with relish.
because just a moment ago,
The giant hyena pack, the species observed by their civilization observer, had pulled off a flawless team hunt. They had successfully brought down a massive young Dinotherium to feed the entire pack.
lately, the local ecosystem had been deteriorating rapidly due to the rampage of scimitar-toothed tigers.
This had indirectly made survival incredibly difficult for the giant hyenas, who were also predators, because food was becoming extremely scarce.
Most of the prey in this territory ended up in the jaws of those scimitar-toothed tigers.
Even though the scimitar-toothed tigers didn't target the giant hyenas directly.
Indirect impact was absolutely devastating. This pack of giant hyenas had gone 2 consecutive days without finding a single bite to eat.
And unlike the ground apes, who could rely on wild fruit to fill their bellies when meat was scarce,
For the strictly carnivorous giant hyenas, a lack of prey
would have nothing short of a death sentence. These giant hyena packs weren't just limited to this area.
their tracks could be found across other parts of the continent as well.
However, their overall numbers were far, far fewer than those of the scimitar-toothed tigers.
Therefore, any loss to the pack was something the people of the Sakura Nation simply could not accept.
Fortunately, luck was on the giant hyenas' side today. They spotted a massive herd of Dinotherium on a large-scale migration. The Dinotherium herd was merely passing through this territory,
Searching for a more abundant water source.
and this presented the perfect opportunity for the giant hyena pack.
Charging a herd of Dinotherium head-on would have been pure suicide. Those beasts were simply colossal.
And could easily crush a giant hyena to death with a single step.
So, relying on their predatory instincts, they sought out a weak link in the herd.
A young Dinotherium trailing at the very back,
It was easily 2 sizes smaller than the other adults.
and, likely due to its shorter legs, was slowly falling behind the rest of the herd.
Yet, the herd would never slow down their advance for a single straggler. This is the raw, unyielding law of nature.
Living in a herd doesn't mean solidarity.
And there is rarely any concept of helping one another among individuals.
You either keep pace with the herd, or you get left behind.